Good afternoon and welcome to Lunch with League. My name is Martha Butsier and I am co-president of the League of Women Voters in San Jose, Santa Clara. We also serve the cities of Milpitas, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan political organization. Our purpose is to encourage informed and active participation in government and to influence public policy through education and advocacy. We do not support or oppose any political party or candidate. Each month at Lunch with League, we host a speaker who can share information and ideas that will help broaden our understanding of issues in our community and our nation. This month, we welcome Santa Clara County Sheriff Robert Jonsen, who became the 27th sheriff in this county in 2022. He has been in law enforcement since 1986. Most recently as chief of police in Palo Alto and Menlo Park. Previously, he served 27 years with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, with his last command as the Lancaster Sheriff Station Captain. Sheriff Johnson's community policy initiatives have garnered several awards, and he co-developed resiliency training programs for public service, known as Courageous Heart, the Human Behind the Badge, that are now being offered to law enforcement agencies throughout California. He will be speaking to us today on the state of the Sheriff's Office and its programming for innovation. Following Sheriff Johnson's presentation, League member Barbara Marshman will pose questions sent in advance, as well as those you send through chat as they occur to you. Please invite and join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Santa Clara County Sheriff Robert Jonsen. Glad you're here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Very, very honored to be with all of you today. Really appreciate the opportunity to give you kind of a overview of what we've done over the past 11 months. For those that may not know, I was actually put into this position after the election of November of last year. I started in December of last year, so I came in a month early. So we're coming up on a one-year anniversary, and I think there's a lot of things you're going to be excited to hear about. At least I'm hoping you'll be excited to hear, because progress is being made. So I'm very, very excited about this afternoon. So thank you again. So let me just transition for a moment. I'm going to share my screen. Hopefully it works to the way we planned. And if somebody could just let me know, is that the screen that we're looking for?
Perfect.
Okay, great. So one of the things, I'd like to do, and some of you are going to wonder, well, why are you showing us a picture of an old truck? Well, there's a reason I'm showing you this picture, because I think there's a lot of parallels with what I've come into with this organization. And this is, by the way, is a truck. It's for those that fancy old trucks or vintage vehicles. This is a 1946 Ford pickup. It's a pickup I actually bought during the pandemic, thinking it would give us something to do during that time. And a lot of people, a lot of family members, when I bought this truck, they said, "What are you doing? This thing is beyond repair. It has been sitting on a farm for decades. It doesn't run. It's got a tremendous amount of work. It's going to be a tremendous challenge." But the reality is I actually saw potential in this truck, beyond what some of my family saw. And I knew it was going to be a challenge, but there's two things. One is I do enjoy challenges. It's something that makes me continue to move forward. And again, I saw potential. And, clearly this truck has seen better days, and at the time, literally the engine was frozen. It had not been driven for who knows how long. So it was definitely going to be a project. But what I saw in this truck, I also saw in 2022, when I decided to run for sheriff of Santa Clara County, the same potential and the same kind of correlation that it was. Now, literally, it wasn't a truck, but it was an organization that had seen better days. It was an organization that had gone through some tremendously rough period, especially the last few years this organization has faced. And so I knew that it was going to need to be tuned up. It was going to require some areas for improvement. But the exciting part that I have found is that just like restoring this truck, reviving this organization didn't necessarily mean I had to replace all the parts. In the same way, I didn't have to replace the entire truck to bring it back to life. It's about really identifying what needs to be done, staying extremely focused on enhancing the existing components that are working and building upon that foundation. And I'm very pleased to say I didn't have to scrap everything. I didn't have to start from scratch, because inside this organization, I have found there to be a tremendous amount of amazing men and women who are committed to serving our community. So I'm hoping today to kind of outline for you what I did initially when I came in, the progress we've made over the past year, and the things that we're hoping to accomplish in the years to come. So one of the things, and you may have read about this early on in my tenure, we put out a 100-day report, and this is a publication that's available on our website. It was something that I thought was important for us to do. And what we did is brought in the entire command staff and really looked in a very honest way of the challenges this organization has faced, what they've already done to address some of those challenges, where the areas for improvement were going to have to be needed, and where we needed to devote our resources. And outlined in this particular report are several things. It actually highlighted what we were going to do to stabilize the organization, what we planned on doing to increase transparency, accountability, and oversight within the organization, how we're going to focus on the community, how we're going to implement rehabilitation within our correctional facilities, and really developing our workforce to be in line with best practices for this profession. So that gave us a template to go by, and it was really important for the organization as well as the community, in my opinion, to see that we had a plan, this is what it looked like, and this is what we were hoping to accomplish. And for me, again, I had the advantage or disadvantage of being an outsider coming into the organization. I saw it as a tremendous advantage. As you heard in my introduction, I'm not foreign to sheriff's organizations because I worked for the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department for 27 years. So I'm very well aware of the complexity, the scope of the sheriff's office, and the responsibilities that we have in serving our community. But as an outsider, and the things that I'd heard during the campaign was there was room for improvement around transparency, accountability, and even the oversight. Even though the oversight had already started taking shape through the Board of Supervisors implementation of Oakland, the outside auditor, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But I really wanted to make it public for the information that we had public for everybody to see what we were doing. So we created a transparency portal on our website. So now any one of you can go, and maybe some of you have already, you can go on to the Santa Clara Sheriff's Office website, and you could go about us, and you could go down, and there will be the transparency portal. And what we've done on that portal is provided a tremendous amount of information for anybody to have access to at any given time. A lot of this information was information that you would have had to request, and then you would have had to wait for it to get collected and sent out. A lot of people refer to that as a public records request. We're trying to make as much available to the public as we can. There's been a lot of improvement in this over the past 11 months. So I'm really excited to share, because some of this was dictated actually by state law. And every agency, for your awareness, is required to report out on some very specific items. And SB 1421 and SB 16 that were implemented a couple of years ago required all law enforcement agencies to report out on their very high profile incidents. For the most part, officer-involved shootings, use of force where there was significant injury, those kind of things that really garnered public attention. Agencies are now required to put those cases online and have them be transparent for the public. We took that and went way beyond that as far as what we wanted to put on. So when you go through our portal there, you'll see access to not just that required information, but as you can see, we have our timetables on there for crime data. We use UCR crime statistics, which we'll put up annually. We'll put our use of force on there. We show our custody statistics, hiring demographics, the investigations, special investigations that are going, and special enforcement things that are going on. So you can dive deep. It's got to be about 25 pages of information alone just on the crime data. And to give you an idea of what that kind of looks like, if you were to pop in, you could start off in a very high level of just a global idea of, well, what is crime within this county compared to the state, you know, and where we're at, and whether it's violent crime, property crime. When I say these crimes that are on our website, it's UCR, which is Unified Crime Reporting, that every agency has to report. And really, those are your top 8 crimes within your jurisdiction that involve homicide, robbery, aggravated assault, burglaries, larceny, arson, and other thefts. So it's the higher level crimes that we're required to report. So we break those down to give communities an understanding of how we're doing. We go down all the way into our own categories, as I just mentioned, so you can see how we're doing, whether it's homicides, robberies, burglaries, everything else. And we'll continually update this so you see it year after year. And this will give us an idea of how we're serving our community and where we need to devote our resources. One of the things that a lot of agencies are combating right now is retail theft. I think it's no secret to any of you. This has been something that's been publicized quite a bit. We hear about the magnitude of smash and grabs, grab and runs, you know, petty thefts, people running in, taking multiple items and running out. Has really become a significant issue for the state of California. We are not exempt from that. But what we were really proactive about is the state put out a grant this year to allow agencies to combat retail theft. And we secured the largest amount for Santa Clara County of $11 million. So we have $11 million that's been given to us to really be hyper-focused on retail theft within our county. So we're putting together a high-impact team, other resources so we can do that and work with our partners in reducing property-related thefts within our county. So I'm very excited about that. I really appreciated the grant support that gives us that ability to be proactive about it rather than just continually being reactive. So that's a very positive thing. You know, I want to take a side note for a moment because there's another thing that you can access on our website now. And it was really prompted by a lot of the controversy that this organization faced prior to my arrival with the issuance of concealed weapons permits, CCWs, as most people know. And one of the things I did almost immediately coming in, because that was such a pressing issue, is to revamp how we do that process, how that application from the moment it comes in, how it's processed and what the requirements are. And what we did is put that online now. We contracted with an outside vendor, Permitium. So now when an individual, no matter who they are, they want a CCW, it's not about coming straight to the sheriff asking for a permit to be issued. Everybody has to go through this process to where they apply through Permitium. We're not involved at all. The initial application starts through Permitium. And we've added actually multiple layers because just for the record, I'm not a huge fan of having more guns out in our society, but concealed firearm permits are something that, as you know, the Supreme Court has decided we have to be a little more flexible in how those are issued, meaning law enforcement agencies, and they really have to have a process in place. So we made sure we had a very comprehensive process in place. It starts with that application. Once the application goes through that vetting process, we do an internal interview of the individual. Then what we added, which is not required throughout the state, but I felt was critically important, we added a psychological exam. So now anybody that applies for a CCW with the sheriff's office, they would be required to go through a psychological exam. And if they get through that, then we've also enhanced a training requirement. By law, it's 8 hours. We doubled that to at least 16 hours for the applicant to continue to move forward. And if they make it through all those various processes, then yes, we issue the CCW. It is no longer at the discretion of the sheriff. If they've met all those requirements and they get through that, a CCW permit is issued. So we have seen a tremendous increase since the Supreme Court decision. I believe we're over 1,000 applications for our agency alone. And why I say our agency alone is what's changed since the Supreme Court decision that maybe most community members aren't aware of, is a lot of the municipalities have now taken on that responsibility. Prior to that decision of last year, almost all the CCWs came through the sheriff's office. But now local municipalities have more flexibility. So San Jose does their own CCWs now. I believe Milpitas may be doing them, Morgan Hill. So depending where you live, your chief now can issue those CCWs as well. So I'm just talking about the numbers that we're seeing in our organization. And at last count, it was up to about 1,200 applications going through the system. So I can answer questions on that when we get to that point. But I did want you to be aware of that, because now, that's a big question. People say, how do I apply? Well, now it would all start on our online application process. So one of the things I'm really proud about that we've been able to accomplish fairly early on since I've taken over is I made rehabilitation an operational priority for the organization when I came in. And if you follow the budget season of last year, I asked for 3 very specific ads for the organization. And I was approved in obtaining that hiring permission to hire these individuals. And one of them was rehabilitation director. And I'll talk about that in a moment. But the other 2, just so you're aware, was also a communication specialist to help us in how we disseminate information to the public, which we've now hired. And then the third one was a wellness coordinator for the organization's well-being. This profession has been under a tremendous amount of stress. And I say the profession as a whole has been under a tremendous amount of stress over the last few decades, having more and more challenges hiring and recruiting, and that just adds more stress to the existing workforce. So we felt prioritizing the well-being of the men and women that work for us is critically important because we feel if they're well, both physically and psychologically, then they're going to serve their communities in a much better fashion. So we're very excited about that hire. That individual's came with a background of wellness and public service. So she has been on for about a month now. So we're looking forward to seeing what she can do for the organization. But let me go back to this piece, the rehabilitation director. Very excited about the selection that we've made. The individual will be starting in January. A press release will be coming out in the very near future. We just had the interviews and just selected the individual. But why that's so important is because over the last few years, what we would hope would happen well before they get in jail. We have individuals come in that really do need some kind of rehabilitation, access to programs before they go back into society. And generally, that has occurred at the state level. But since the passage of AB 109, a lot more individuals that are arrested and sentenced stay in county systems. So we have, on a daily average, we have about 2,800 to 3,000 inmates here in Santa Clara County. And a lot of them really do want to have access to programs. So we made that an operational priority and really expanding the number of programs that are being offered to the incarcerated justice housed individuals, and really building the educational opportunities as well. And why I make that distinction is because prior to my arrival, there were numerous vocational programs going on. Some of them had been curtailed since during the pandemic, but numerous vocational programs were going on and individuals had access to. But over the last year, we have exponentially enhanced the educational components that are now, or educational courses offered to justice housed individuals. And the College Collaborative, as you see here on the screen, primarily offered at the Elmwood facility. I'll talk a little bit about why that is. But that College Collaborative, just this year alone, you may have read about it or heard about it on the news. We actually were part of an Emmy Award because Telemundo did a documentary on this College Collaborative concept, and that episode won an Emmy. So they came back and we were able to take some photos with the Emmy. So it was a proud moment for the workforce because they have really worked hard at expanding educational opportunities. And the College Collaborative just last month received an award from the Western Correctional Health Associations, recognizing it as Innovation Program of the Year. And what it is that we've been able to bring in 6 community colleges throughout the county now, which is unheard of. Most organizations, if they're going to offer education in the jails, they'll contract with maybe one community college or one school district to provide educational components. We've actually been able to get a MOU, an agreement in place with 6 community colleges throughout the county. And why that's so important, because when an individual comes in, they now have access to all the programs, all the courses of any of those 6. And then when they get released, they can transfer to any one of those 6 community colleges. So they may, to give you an example, they may come in and enter a program that Foothill is offering. But when they get out, they may live down by Gavilan. So they can now go to Gavilan to continue their education. So it's a case management partnership, which is working very well for us. We have close to, I believe, 500 students now enrolled in these classes, which is outstanding. It's giving them purpose. I've been to a couple of the ceremonies where individuals are getting certified or getting a degree in something. And you just see the pride and the emotion of having access to that program while they were incarcerated so that they can have something to look forward to when they get released. So we're still going to continue our focus on that and building that out, because I think that's going to be hugely important for the reintegration into society. So that is a piece that I'm extremely proud that we're continuing to build upon. Our hope is to continue to add not only maybe the final couple of community colleges in the county, but maybe some of the state universities so they can continue on past their AA degrees and others. And we do have one program that's allowing for them to work towards their bachelor's. So that's a really exciting rehabilitation program. You know, when it comes to recruiting, I mentioned this has been a challenge for us. In this organization, I have to say I give kudos to the men and women who have stayed with this organization, because what we've seen in this profession over the last several years, for a variety of reasons, you know, it's really easy for people to come in, get trained, go through an academy, and then they'll lateral to another organization for a variety of reasons. And this organization was, you know, they had that same challenge. People were coming in, going through their academy, and then people were exiting, either resigning or lateraling to another organization. So we really wanted to focus on stabilizing the organization, as I mentioned earlier in the 100-day report. And what we have found is we've really seen a decrease in the amount of people that are exiting. And that's normally, I would say, somewhat common experience that I've noticed, because this is now my 4th agency. And usually when there's a change in leadership, some people will pause because they want to see, are we headed in the right direction? Because a lot of times the reason people are leaving is because the organization's not fulfilling their career aspirations. So when I came in, we really wanted to focus on stabilizing that, really stopping the exodus as best we could, while on the other side, really ramping up the recruiting. And one of the first initiatives we joined earlier in the year, which I think is critically important, was the 30-30 initiative. And that is an initiative that is now a national initiative, where what we're doing is committing that we're going to strive to recruit 30% of our workforce being made up of women by the year 2030. So we've kicked that off. We've had a couple of symposiums now. The recruiting seems to be going well. And we've even added another layer to that, which just went out on social media earlier this week, is because for this organization, people have a variety of opportunities to apply for. Not only do they have the opportunity to apply for a deputy sheriff, you know, that would be somebody who's responding to your calls of service. They could apply for a correctional deputy, and those are the ones that are primarily assigned to the jails, or they could apply for a professional staff position throughout the organization. But now we also have what we call the protective service officer position. And that academy just started this week. And that was brought on earlier in the year when the Board of Supervisors decided that they wanted the sheriff's office to put together an academy for security officers. We call them protective service officers. And those are the individuals that provide security for our hospitals, our libraries, our county buildings. So now we're building this model to where we have a standardized program. So anybody that wants to work in those service positions, they would go through this 6-week course. They'd get the basics of policy, protocols, and laws and all of that, just like they would in a normal academy. It's obviously a lot shorter, but it gives them a great framework and foundation to start serving our community. And what it does for us is it's a great entry point for individuals who are interested in public service, but not 100% sure they're ready to become a deputy sheriff or a correctional officer. And it's a great way for us to get them into the organization, get them familiar with the work that we do, start in one of those positions, whether it's a hospital, library, county building. And then if they have those aspirations for going, into a different part of the organization, we're going to be able to provide that, and they'll be able to lateral into a correctional academy or a deputy sheriff academy, whatever they want. So I really love the trifecta approach that we have for our recruiting now. We're seeing a lot of interest, a lot of applications coming in for this protective service position, because again, the requirements aren't as stringent. The ramping up is far faster, meaning compared 6-week academy compared to a 20-week academy that an individual would have to go through for the deputy sheriff position. And as I mentioned, some people just may not be ready to jump all the way into that deputy sheriff position, and for a variety of reasons. And we want to give them that opportunity and ramping up, so to speak. So very excited about having that in place. In wrapping this up, this is what that truck that you saw at the beginning of the presentation looks like today. It took 3 years, but it was a tremendous amount of work, as I mentioned. But I like sharing that story a little bit, because I'm seeing, yes, we're not where we need to be 100%, but the work that's being done in a very short period of time, the energy that we're starting to see within the organization, the relationships with our county partners is night and day compared to a year ago. And people are excited. They're excited to come to work. They're excited to be recruiting others into our workforce, which is critically important. And they're really excited about doing the work they do to better our communities, to better our jails. We're receiving a lot of positive feedback from our federal monitors who were put in place from, the incidents from years past and the consent decrees. And, our relationship with the independent auditor, Mike Janako's office, has been going very well. And I think that's how I'm going to wrap up, because I think the oversight piece is really critically important. And for the community, I think it's important that you hear from me that I welcome that oversight. And I think I welcome it probably fairly openly, because I've been used to it my entire career. I had oversight when I was in Los Angeles, I had it in Palo Alto, and now I have it here. And I've always been a believer that oversight makes you a more professional organization, makes you a more accountable organization, and it really helps to build that trust. And we have opened the door so much so with the independent auditor that I think we are now becoming a best practice model. And why I say that is, for those that have followed this, the independent oversight for the sheriff's office was something that was board directed. And they had outlined the responsibility of the independent auditor. And if you followed the organization, there was a lot of contention there at the beginning, because it's actually been in place for 4 years. But before my arrival, there was a lot of contention between the auditor and the prior sheriff to getting access to information. So they really weren't doing the job that the board had put them in place to do. Well, transparency and accountability, as I mentioned, was paramount when I came in. And we really started from day one working on enhancing what's referred to as the information sharing agreement with the independent auditor. And we finally have that in place. And it is expansively different than it was a year ago. And it is almost as if they're integrated into the organization. And when I say integrated, I say it cautiously, because what we've actually done to give them a bird's eye view early on in any investigation is they can now have access to all our investigations from the moment they're opened, and then they actually sit in on the review after any investigation or complaint has been completed. There's a process, we call it a incident review board. They come in, meaning OIR, and they sit in on those incident reviews and have the opinion to provide oversight and comments and recommendations. So again, the relationships have been phenomenally impacted over the last year in a positive way, and really looking forward to continuing the progress as we move forward. And with that, I'm going to pause and maybe turn it back over to Martha to see if anybody has any questions on that deep dump that I just provided to you.
Thank you, Sheriff Johnson, for that informative presentation. I absolutely love the truck, the way it turned out, and the use of that as a metaphor. Really good. Now we will open the program to questions. I'd like to introduce Barbara Marchman, a league member and former editorial page editor of the Mercury News, who will ask the sheriff as many of your questions as we can before our program ends at 1 o'clock. Please continue to send questions in on chat as they occur to you. Barbara, you're on.
Thank you. That was a really interesting presentation, Sheriff Johnson. I've heard you before, and this got at actually a lot of the questions that the league members had asked. You saw them, or some of them rather, anyway, it's been really helpful. One thing following it, because a number of questions the last few days have come in on the jails. Is the training improved at this point? Is the staffing adequate to keep, civil conditions in the jails? And on oversight, regarding the jails, is oversight only reviewing reports and so on, or is there anyone actually going into the jails?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So to your first question, the training is dramatically enhanced. We just received the report from the state that we're in compliance. That's something, not only do they have state required training, but they have training required through the consent decrees, and we're in compliance with all of that. So things are going really, really well. To your second question, is it just the oversight? Remember, there's a couple of different components to our oversight. We have the consent decree. We have the 2 consent decrees, which have oversight by federal monitors. And then we have the Office of Independent Review, who does the independent oversight of use of force incidents, policies, protocols, things that we're implementing in the jails. So that's where Mike Giannacco's shop comes in. So both sides have a lot of access, and both sides do come into the jails. Especially the federal monitors. They're here on a very frequent basis, whether they're here to look at our force protocols. They also have access. They can come in and they can just take 5-10 cases randomly and say, we're going to evaluate these force incidents or these types of incidents, and they do an evaluation of them, and then they report back. Where Mike Giannacco's shop and Office of Independent Review, they also are doing an audit of all the Blue Ribbon Commission items. So they bucketed those items. And for those that may not be aware, if you remember, there was 623 initial items out of that Blue Ribbon Commission back in 2015. They've categorized those into about 80 different buckets. And now the oversight provides the board with an update occasionally on how they're doing. I believe they've gone through quite a few of those now over the past couple of years. They've seen progress in quite a few of those different buckets. And then they also identify the areas where there's room for improvement. I would say probably the area that we still receive recommendations for improvement is how we're addressing mental health. And that's a partnership of not just the sheriff's office, but custody health. And we've been really working on addressing how we provide that care and access to care. And then that kind of dovetails into the whole question of, do we have the facilities to do that? Are they built, designed appropriately? And then the last piece of your question is the staffing is something we are constantly building upon. Do we have the adequate number right now? We're still dramatically short on staffing, but we seem to be getting by. The positive and optimistic side of that is we just started our correctional academy a few weeks ago, and it was the highest number of cadets that we've had since the pandemic began. And we also found that to be true with our enforcement side. So we are having people coming back into the profession, and especially with the sheriff's office. So if we can continue with those high number of academy recruits, we're going to be in a good position.
Is the short staffing that continues, is that more caused by fewer applicants recently and people leaving, or is it not enough money?
Well, a little bit of both, right? So, as you know, there was budget reductions of last year. There were expected budget reductions again this year. So what's happened over the last few years is, yes, it's kind of a chicken and cart type thing, or however you want to phrase it, because we had lost a lot of bodies leading up to the pandemic, police reform, the controversy under this organization. So they had a lot of vacancies. They were holding a lot of vacancies that were funded, but we weren't getting applicants in. So what happened the last couple of years with the budget is they're taking the vacancies. So now we're actually having people apply, but we don't necessarily have the vacancies anymore that we had before. Does that make sense?
Yes.
It goes back to, we're kind of in this position where momentum is moving forward. And if we get to a point where we're capable of filling every single vacancy, the relationship with the board, at least so far, has been very positive. So I'm hoping if we get to that really optimal position, we could go back and say, hey, we now have the bodies coming in, give us the funding so we can put these people in positions. So I'm optimistic we'll get there. It's just going to take a little time.
Okay, moving out to enforcement a little bit. A lot of jurisdictions now are referring criminal elder abuse cases to social services. What's the county policy on this, and how do you strike that balance when serious criminal activity may have taken place?
Yeah, anytime there's a crime, we're going to take the initial report and the investigation. What often happens is that we will refer or connect Adult Protective Services with the individual so they can get the services. The one area in the enforcement that I'm really excited about and hoping to actually build upon, which kind of offsets this a little bit, is our psychiatric emergency response team. You may have heard of me talk about those before. Those are where we have a deputy sheriff and a mental health clinician in the car together. And it's the same concept. And I think there has been tremendous value in that. We've had it in place for about 2 years. And why I bring that up is they've been very effective in responding to calls involving a mental health crisis. The same approach can be done with elder abuse, because why it's so valuable is the deputy sheriff can take the criminal report, but the clinician can give them the services they need or identify things that need to be brought into the equation. So we have 2 of those units in place for the county right now. I'm hoping that model builds out, but that again requires a partnership with the other entities to find staffing to put in a car with us.
Great, that sounds terrific. With the rise of social division in our country and political divisions, is there anything we can all do, the public, to help your department keep us safer?
Yeah, the community relationship is critically important, and it does start with trust. And I think that's the key component, is people have to feel comfortable calling the agency, and we've seen that in the past where there wasn't always that trust for a variety of reasons. And I think it's important that the community members have trust in the agency that serves them, feels comfortable in calling, no matter what the issue is, and has the confidence that the agency is going to actually respond and do something about it. And again, this is where we've heard the retail theft is really starting to create a lot of anxiety for people, a lot of concern. The residential burglaries is the same thing, organized crews going into residential areas and burglarizing homes. So that's why I'm very excited about that retail theft grant funding, because that's going to give us the ability to deploy some of those resources and make those connections with community members.
That's great. You've talked in other venues about restorative justice.
Right.
Could you talk a little bit about your philosophy on that and whether you can bring any to bear here?
Yeah, I think that, you know, this is an area that I think is probably going to be the most transformational for this county. I think that is a priority for the county as a whole, to identify ways of, you know, being more creative in how we respond to people who are incarcerated, or hopefully preventing them from being incarcerated in the first place. You know, we just had a conversation this morning about transitional housing for people coming out of incarceration, how that works, and why we have this cycle of, you know, constantly coming in and out. So I think it's something that, and even with the design of the new facility, a lot of my conversations have been about not just designing a housing facility to house people, but to actually provide a facility that gets them well, so they can get engaged in these programs, whether it's vocational or educational. And that's going to continue to be my philosophy if we can get it all together.
In the past, the sheriff's department's interactions with the San Jose Police Department have been sort of competitive and a little difficult. How is that going along?
Well, I like the way you phrased it, competitive yet difficult, because that is the reality. I think, and I'm smiling because I think there's always going to be that competitive nature.
Yeah.
And the reason I say that, because when I was in LA, it was the same way between the LA Sheriff's Department and LAPD, because they were considered the two big organizations. And in this county, that's the same equation. San Jose and the Santa Clara were the two largest law enforcement agencies. So we're always going to have that bantering. But I would say the relationships right now are going really well. I think we're finding a lot of commonalities. You know, Chief Mata's has been phenomenal to work with, but I think even the collaboration with some of the issues we just talked about on retail theft, we're going to make sure he has some of our resources if he needs it, and we'll be able to work together. Because the reality is, if our objective is to make the county safer, it doesn't mean we have to work in our own silos, and that happens quite a bit sometimes. But I think collaboratively, when we work together and really address the big items, we'll be more successful in the outcome.
Okay. I know you're a supporter of community policing. How can that relate to the sheriff's department, which, even though you're collaborating with San Jose and others on specific projects, most of your enforcement is out in rural areas, in Cupertino and places like that too. But how does it relate to the sheriff's department?
Yeah, I think that was a great question. You know, and that's one of the things yesterday we had. They're very creative, and I give them credit for it. Our West Valley station that you just talked about, Cupertino, Saratoga, Los Altos Hills, those that may not do, those are our contract cities where we provide law enforcement service for that particular city. And for the sheriff's office, those are our 3 contract cities. And then, yes, to Barbara's point, we provide law enforcement services for the broader unincorporated areas. But what we've also made an operational priority this year is to have more community engagement within those areas. So just yesterday we had, I think all of you have heard the coffee with a cop, but they call it LAWTEE, LAWTEE, LAWTEE. So it was really creative. I give them credit, but it was a great turnout, and people were just laughing and smiling because of the creative name that drew to the event. But those kind of events, even though they're small, maybe in number, they really do help build that relationship of learning who your officers are that serve your jurisdiction. The more of those we can have, and when I say operational directive, I've really been advocating for us to be more engaged in these community events, so we can have that, start building those relationships at the very lowest level, meaning the line, the deputy sheriff responding to the calls, and the community members. Not necessarily my presence has to be there all the time, but having those relationships built helps with the community relations and the community policing. Because, you know, and both our captains, the captain of West Valley and here at headquarters, they've also been given the directive of building advisory groups just like I had in Palo Alto at community advisory groups. Because again, coming together with community members occasionally, hearing their concerns, whether it's traffic related, homelessness, crime, whatever it may be, is really, really important that we hear it directly from the community members. So those are being built out as we speak.
Okay. Have you requested funds to buy tasers?
So we haven't requested funds to buy tasers. We are going to be bringing to the board a request for tasers. And whether we request funds for that or not, right now we're looking at the approval. The funds may be, because if we're asking out of the general fund, that would be one thing. If we're asking out of funds that we have through other accounts, we'll do that. We're the only agency, for those that may or may not know, we're the only agency in the state as far as the jails that doesn't have that option within the jails. And we're the only agency in the region that doesn't have tasers for our enforcement personnel. And I will be honest with you, since my arrival here, and again, I would say before I was never a huge fan of tasers. I've never really seen them to be highly effective. I've seen them be effective in certain circumstances, but there's a lot of variables. Why I'm willing to take it in front of the board this time around is they have a newer model that gives us greater distance so we can have a better opportunity for de-escalation. And it's got a lot of options that we didn't have before. One of them that I'm extremely impressed with from an accountability measure is the new model is the only model that automatically activates the body-worn camera as soon as it comes out of the holster. So that will give us, really great accountability piece to see how it's being used, when it's being used, and ensure it's being used appropriately. So we'll be bringing that to the board most likely in December for their consideration.
Okay, so it is. I mean, it has seemed that tasers are just not very safe for, you think that is changing.
Yeah, and again, I'll speak
technology.
to that in the board meeting, because again, I think the new model makes it drastically different than prior models, both from a safety standpoint, an accountability standpoint, and a de-escalation standpoint.
Okay. One of our attendees, Connie, I can't see her last name, says your educational program for the folks in the jail is fantastic. I'm concerned that upon release, these people will face many obstacles, doors shut as a result of their criminal record. And I've personally seen that with a distant young relative who, very sad situation. How can you use your office to influence public policy to allow people who made a mistake and have paid their dues to come out and actually get a job, and despite their criminal record, and move on with their life? It's very difficult.
Yeah, it's a great question, very insightful and very true. And we've been experiencing this for decades, right? It's not something new. And that's why, again, I'm excited about the College Collaborative, because again, I've seen the genuine emotion that people are experiencing. Having, for one example, an individual that just got his degree said he was the first one in his family to ever receive a degree. And ironically, it was when he was in jail. Yeah. But he was extremely proud of that, obtaining that and wanting to get out and do something positive with it. And where I think we may have influence is if individuals come in and truly want to change their pathway and they engage in these programs, we should almost give it to a point, make it a point where it's guaranteed they will have access to a job, or they will have access to maybe even an early release. That's something I've been talking about recently. If somebody fulfills an obligation, is really motivated to get back into the workforce, maybe even coming out of the jails earlier than their sentence would, and we can do that. We just talked about it today, about establishing a county parole board to where we could have make decisions on people who have been sentenced to get them out early so they can continue on with their life. So there's work possibilities there that I'm very excited about. We've also directed our programs unit to really start working with vocational programs that can certify people, meaning it's a veterinary program, a mechanics program, and again, connecting those individuals once they receive that certification with employers so they could be released and actually have a job from day one. So these are all things that we are working on, and I have high hopes that we'll be successful in.
That would be wonderful. There are great programs to help people get their records expunged, but they've got to get a job first. They've got to be, you know, got to prove that it's a difficult thing. And I'm really glad you're on top of it. What do you see as your role in trying to prevent gun violence, whether it's in schools or just it seems to be rising everywhere? Is there anything in particular you're doing to address that, or that you'd like communities to do to address that?
Yeah, actually, we were just on a panel, 2 weeks ago with several members throughout the county on just that topic, school-related violence. And that's something I've always had a passion for. It's something I worked on in LA. I used to facilitate nationally for institutional violence. And I would say one of the things that we could do far better at, and I say we, society, is information sharing. And we in Santa Clara County, we have, and really the California, we have the red flag laws, which other states may or may not have, which I'm a huge advocate for, I think are critically important. But the reason I brought up the sharing information, I think there's a lot of times where somebody will have information or a concern about somebody and they don't share it because they just, for a variety of reasons, whether it's within the school, the business, the home. And I really think with everything that we're seeing in our society, and especially the rise in gun-related violence, we need to start sharing information, calling resources, and not evaluating. And then hopefully, because this is something I do believe, is none of these just happen. There's always warning signs. And if we can be aware of the incident well before something of that magnitude happens, maybe we could get the person intervention that they need to stabilize whatever thought process they're having. Because Virginia Tech was a perfect example of that years ago, if you remember, where a young man killed many, many people at Virginia Tech University, and he had had a history of mental health issues. And the sad part about it, not only was the loss of life, but that individual throughout his life, when he did have intervention, it seemed to stabilize him for that point of time. Yeah. And if he had that intervention, maybe at that level when he was in college, we could have averted that crisis. So again, since then, I've been a huge advocate for sharing information, collaborating, analyzing the threat, and actually being proactive about doing something. And on a side note, a very small side note to that, we are having gun buyback December 2nd. You're probably all familiar with what those are, but we're hosting one here at Reed Hillview Airport. And that's where individuals can turn in unwanted guns. And a lot of people say, well, what's the value of that? Again, usually it's not the criminals dropping off their guns for a gift card. But again, you know, with the rise of burglaries and thefts that we're seeing, if somebody doesn't want a gun in their home, let's get it out of the home, discard it, and get it out of society. So we'll be offering that. We do those usually twice a year. And like I said, the next one is December 2nd.
Okay. Marie Arnold asks, do you see having vocational classes return to our high schools as perhaps a needed thing to help young people avoid going outside the law?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'll leave that to the school districts because that's a question for them. I love them. I participated in those when I was in high school. Did I really learn a whole lot from some of them more than others? And you know, but if I hadn't taken that mechanics class in high school, who knows if I would have wanted to take on 1946 Ford, right? But that's something for me to want to do. But to your point, I think the question is, could it help our society getting young people a skill, a vocation, a direction? Absolutely. I'm an advocate for it. And that's why I'm really hoping to build them out into correctional facilities.
There was a lot of publicity before and during your race about what had been going on in the sheriff's department and the jails. A lot of information. Was there anything that surprised you?
No, you know, I guess what really surprised me was the lack of information getting out about what they've done since then. So, you know, because again, I was an outsider, I was hearing the same things. And so I was wondering, how bad is it inside the jails? But when I got here and I actually started dissecting what we're doing, how we're doing it, it's phenomenal. And it's extremely impressive, the amount of work and the progress they've made over the last few years and putting things together, systems in place, jail management systems that are being built. So they have really become, in several areas, a model for other jails throughout the state. Our ADA access, our classifications unit, how we segregate or don't segregate individuals has been drastically improved. And, you know, my hope and fingers crossed and all of the above is that we continue to moving forward and becoming that best model for other agencies as far as incarceration goes.
Well, thank you. I got what I think was a signal from Martha that we probably need to wrap up. This has been really interesting for me, and I'm really glad you came to speak with us. Thank you.
I appreciate you offering the opportunity. So thank you.
Martha?
Yeah, thank you, Barbara. I want to thank you, Sheriff Jonsen, for being here today with us, and all the participants for the great questions and conversations that you were able to lend us. I want to remind you that Sheriff Jonsen has agreed to stay on for a few minutes after our meeting formally closes this afternoon so that you can continue to ask him questions if you have some. I also want to remind league members that our annual holiday gathering will be in person on Monday, December 11th from 4:30 to 7:30 at a private home in Willow Glen. The party will feature wines donated by Bert George of Joseph George Wines, and they will be accompanied by a taste of Willow Glen, refreshments from local restaurants. Sign up for this fun event on our website at www.lwbsjsc.org. Thank you all for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you at future league programs.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.